winter of 1171, the wind howled across the frozen plains of the Mongol steppe. A boy no older than 9 dug through snow for scraps, his ribs showing through tattered skins. His family, abandoned by their own tribe, had been cast out to die, betrayed, disgraced, and forgotten. That boy was Temujin. Before the world knew the name Genghis Khan, before cities trembled at the thunder of hooves, he was nothing. A fatherless outcast, hunted by rival clans, imprisoned in wooden stocks by those who feared what he might become. No allies, no empire, only hunger, vengeance, and a will that refused to break. What does it take to rise from nothing and conquer the world? How does a fugitive, born in exile, go on to unite the wild, warring tribes of the steppe, only to unleash an unstoppable storm upon China, Persia, Russia, and beyond? They called him a barbarian, a demon, the scourge of God. But to his people, he was the bringer of justice, an avenger of the oppressed, a breaker of ancient chains. This is not the story of a king born in a palace. It is the story of a boy who was starved, enslaved, and hunted, who clawed his way back with blood-soaked hands and fire in his eyes. This is the rise of a storm, the making of a myth, the forging of an emperor from pain, from war, and from betrayal. Genghis Khan didn't inherit power. He took it, and the world has never recovered.
Temujin航域 Temujin 的领域 Temujin 促使你怎么 Temujin 看不落
Before he was Genghis Khan, before the great conquests, the sieges, the rivers of blood, Temujin was born into a world of chaos. The Mongolian plateau was not a land of wealth or kings. It was a battlefield of survival. Bitter winters turned flesh to ice. Summers brought drought and starvation. There were no castles here, only tents lashed by wind and smoke. No cities, only the sky, the earth, and the sound of hooves pounding across the plains. The Mongols lived as nomads, herding sheep, hunting game, and riding with the speed of storms. Their homes, the Gurs, were round and mobile, moved with the seasons. Survival demanded flexibility, loyalty, and violence. This was not a place for weakness. At the time of Temujin's birth in the 1160s, the Mongol world was a mosaic of rival clans, the Taichiyud, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, the Keret, and many more. Each tribe was its own kingdom, led by chieftains, shamans, and warlords, each fighting for dominance. These clans shared blood, but not peace. Betrayal was routine. Alliances were made by marriage, then shattered by ambition. Honor meant little when herds could be stolen in the night and kin slaughtered for power. There was no Mongol nation, only scattered tribes locked in endless blood, feuds. The Jin dynasty to the southeast and the Western Shah to the west looked upon the steppe with contempt, using diplomacy, trade, and subterfuge to keep the tribes divided. In this game of isolation and chaos, no single man had ever united the steppe, until Temujin. While the Mongols lacked temples or written scripture, their belief system ran deep. They worshipped the eternal blue sky, Tengri, the spirits of the ancestors, the forces of nature, and omens in the wind all guided their fate. The steppe was alive, each mountain sacred, each river powerful. Shamans acted as healers, prophets, and conduits to the divine. Temujin would grow to believe he was chosen by this sky, not merely to survive, but to rule. Temujin's father, Yeskuge, was a chieftain of the Borjing clan, a powerful warrior with royal lineage, descended from the great Bodoncha Munkag, a semi-legendary Mongol forefather. But even that blood offered no guarantee. Yeskuge had enemies, and when Temujin was just 9, his father was poisoned by the Tatars while returning from arranging his son's marriage. The family, now leaderless, was cast out by their tribe, stripped of protection, left to die. It was not uncommon. The steppe did not mourn the weak, but it did not yet know what fire it had unleashed. While the Mongols warred among themselves, great powers loomed beyond their borders. The Jin dynasty, controlling northern China, was wealthy, structured, and militarily formidable. They saw the nomads as useful mercenaries and dangerous pests. The Western Cha, a Tangut kingdom to the west, sought to control trade routes and territory along the Silk Road. The Khwarezmian Empire, far to the west, was a rising Islamic empire of cities and silk, destined to clash violently with Mongol steel. These were civilizations of cities and walls, art and gold, but none of them feared the Mongols, because the Mongols were not one people. From the moment they could walk, Mongol children were taught to ride. By 5, they could shoot from horseback. By 10, they were herding. By adolescence, they were warriors. Life was communal, but harsh. Women worked alongside men, managing the gers, milking livestock, and riding into battle when needed. Marriage was often political. Raids and retaliations were common. The line between survival and death was razor thin. There were no walls on the steppe, only wind and eyes that never looked away from the horizon. And in this world, a boy named Temujin would rise, not because it was his destiny, but because he refused to die. His childhood would be a crucible: starvation, betrayal, slavery, escape. But in every wound, a lesson; in every loss, a fire. And soon that fire would ignite the world. After the death of his father, his family was exiled from their tribe. His mother, Holun, was left to raise her children alone, scavenging roots, hunting rats, and stealing scraps from wild dogs. They survived winter after winter with nothing but sheer will. But Temujin wasn't like other boys. Hunger made him sharp. Isolation made him ruthless. Even as a child, he learned what the steppe demanded. Loyalty must be earned. Mercy could be fatal. Temujin's first act of violence wasn't on a battlefield. It was against his own blood. His half-brother Bekta had begun hoarding food and asserting dominance. In a land where every scrap could mean life or death, such selfishness was treason. Temujin killed him. It was not vengeance. It was survival. The steppe whispered that the boy was dangerous, but danger on the Mongolian plains could be power. As Temujin grew into adolescence, his reputation did not go unnoticed. Rival tribes, particularly the Teachud, who feared his lineage, kidnapped him. They chained him, forced him into a wooden collar, and held him like livestock. Most boys would have died there, faceless and forgotten. But Temujin escaped. He was aided by a sympathetic guard, proof that even in chains, he could command loyalty. When he vanished into the night, barefoot and hunted, the Teachud didn't yet realize they had just sharpened the knife that would one day slit their throats. Soon after, Temujin made his way to the Ongarat tribe, where his father had once arranged a marriage. There, he met Berta, a young woman who would become more than his wife. She would be his partner, his anchor, and the future mother of Mongol royalty. Their union was political, but their bond was real. It gave Temujin not just legitimacy, but a reason to rise. Temujin understood something that many steppe warlords never grasped. Brute force meant nothing without loyalty. He began to gather followers, not just blood kin, but anyone willing to fight for him. He promoted men based on merit, not lineage. He shared loot equally. He punished betrayal without hesitation. And most importantly, he remembered every friend and every enemy. Among his early allies was a powerful Karaite leader named Togrul, known as the Wang Khan. Temujin called him father. Together with his blood brother Jamukha, Temujin began to carve out a small but disciplined warband. But ambition has no friends. Tragedy struck when the Merkits, sworn enemies of his father, abducted Berta in a night raid. She was taken, violated, and imprisoned among strangers. For most men, this would have been the end. For Temujin, it was war. With the help of Wang Khan and Jamukha, he attacked the Merkit camp and rescued Berta. It was a bloody vengeance, but it had a cost. Berta was pregnant, and the child's paternity was uncertain. Temujin accepted the boy, Jochi, as his own. But the seed of future conflict had been sown. Among Mongols, uncertainty of lineage was a poison, and for Jochi, it would never fully fade. As Temujin's power grew, so did the resentment from old allies. Jamukha, once his sworn brother, saw Temujin's rise as a threat. Jamukha was a traditional aristocrat, noble blood, old values. Temujin was a revolutionary, elevating peasants, outcasts, and former slaves to positions of power. In 1187, the two clashed in open war. Jamukha's forces outnumbered Temujin's nearly 2-1. At the Battle of Dalan Baljot, Temujin suffered a crushing defeat. His warriors were captured and executed, boiled alive, their heads paraded on spikes. Temujin survived, and he never forgot. Defeat did not break him. It refined him. Temujin began to rebuild, not as a bandit chieftain, but as a state maker. He created a new form of military organization, decimal units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000. Each soldier owed loyalty to the commander, not the clan. This stripped away tribalism and replaced it with absolute loyalty to one man, Temujin. He established a strict code of law, the Yasa, which punished theft, betrayal, and cowardice. He banned the kidnapping of women, redistributed resources, and built a reputation as a just but fearsome leader. For the first time, the Mongol steppe was becoming a nation. In the late 1190s, the Jin dynasty, frustrated by constant Tatar raids, turned to Temujin. They offered him support in exchange for wiping out the Tatars. Temujin accepted, but this was more than a favor, it was personal. The Tatars had poisoned his father. Temujin unleashed hell. He slaughtered entire Tatar tribes, men, women, and children. He spared only those under a certain height, ensuring no future rebellion. The message was clear: betrayal would be punished with extinction. Fear spread, but so did loyalty. Clans that once mocked him now bent the knee. Temujin's next move was against the Taichud, the very tribe that had enslaved him. He destroyed them. Without mercy, he captured his former jailer, the man who had once placed the wooden collar around his neck. He spared him, not out of pity, but out of principle. Temujin knew when to kill, and he knew when to make his enemies live with what they had done. In 1206, after 2 decades of war, blood, and political mastery, the great Mongol assembly, the Kurultai, was called. Nobles, warriors, and chieftains from every corner of the steppe gathered at the shores of Koknur. There, they declared Temujin not merely a warlord, but Genghis Khan, universal ruler. He was no longer just a survivor, he was the master of the steppe. and the world beyond was about to tremble. In 1206, Temujin became Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. But his vision didn't end at the edge of the steppe. He was no longer content to unite the Mongols. He would bring the world to its knees. His methods would terrify nations. His legacy would remake continents. This was no longer a tribal warlord. This was the turning point in world history. Genghis Khan's first test came swiftly. To the southwest stood the Western Shu, a wealthy kingdom guarding the Silk Road, fortified with walled cities and elite armies. The Tanguts believed the nomads were beneath them. They demanded tribute. They underestimated him. In 1209, Genghis Khan rode out with 30,000 men, a mobile force of hardened veterans. The Mongols laid siege to the Shia capital, Zhongsing, cutting off water supplies, burning fields, and outmaneuvering the heavily armored Shia forces. The Tanguts surrendered after devastating losses, but Genghis didn't destroy them yet. He accepted their submission. For now, lesson 1. To resist was death. To yield was survival. To the south, the Jin dynasty ruled northern China, an empire of cities, palaces, and millions. Genghis had traded with them, served them briefly. But now, he would destroy them. In 1211, with a force of nearly 100,000 warriors, the Mongols crossed the Great Wall. The Jin believed their cities were invulnerable. They had cavalry, crossbows, and stone ramparts. But the Mongols had something more deadly: adaptation. They employed Chinese engineers to build siege machines. They cut off supply lines. They encircled cities and starved populations. Their arrows rained down like locusts. Their coordination was unmatched. City after city fell. Refugees fled. The Jin emperor abandoned his capital, but Genghis was just getting started. In 1215, Genghis reached Zhongdu, the imperial capital of the Jin. The siege lasted months. The Mongols used catapults to hurl flaming oil, severed heads, and disease-ridden carcasses over the walls. They burned farms. They polluted water. Inside, panic reigned. Outside, the Mongols waited. When the gates finally fell, the slaughter was biblical. Thousands died in the streets. Temples burned. Screams filled the air as the Mongols rode through flames, blades drawn. Zhongdu fell, and with it, the myth of China's invincibility. The steppe had conquered civilization. Not every victory came through war. Genghis was a master manipulator. He sowed division among his enemies, bribing defectors, exploiting rivalries, weaponizing fear. He made it known: submit, and you may live. Resist, and your lineage ends. One general, Mukhali, became a loyal enforcer of Mongol power, conducting operations while Genghis turned west. Others were not so lucky. Those who betrayed him, he burned their cities. Those who broke oaths, he erased their bloodlines. He did not believe in forgiveness, only submission or fire. While the Jin crumbled in the east, a new player appeared in the west: the Khwarezmian Empire, a Persian Islamic state stretching from Iran to Central Asia. Rich in silk, culture, and gold, Genghis wanted trade. He sent a caravan, peaceful envoys bearing gifts. But the Shah of Khwarezm, paranoid and arrogant, saw only spies. He seized the caravan and executed the Mongol merchants. Genghis sent 3 ambassadors in protest. The Shah had one of them killed. The others were humiliated, their heads shaved. That was his last mistake. In 1219, Genghis Khan marched west, leading one of the most devastating invasions in human history. He divided his army into lightning-fast columns, attacking from multiple fronts. Cities that resisted were obliterated. Those who submitted were spared, briefly. Otrar, Bukhara, Samarkand, Urganch. Ancient cities fell one by one. In Bukhara, Genghis addressed the city's elites in the mosque: "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me. He then razed the city. When it finally fell, Mongol anger exploded. Some chronicles claim hundreds of thousands were massacred. Others say the rivers ran red. Whether exaggerated or not, the psychological impact was catastrophic. Entire populations vanished. Libraries burned, art, culture, and science wiped out. The Shah fled, hunted across his empire, cornered, and finally dying alone on an island in the Caspian Sea. Genghis Khan had avenged the insult and rewritten the map. By 1221, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to the Caspian Sea. No longer was Genghis a steppe warlord. He had crushed civilizations, ended dynasties, and introduced a new world order built not on walls, but on obedience. But it came at a price. The death toll was staggering. Cultures were shattered. Cities turned to dust, and yet trade routes flourished. Banditry vanished. His rule, as ruthless as it was, brought order where chaos once reigned. Genghis Khan did not just lead a revolution, he was the revolution. A turning point in history not driven by ideology or faith, but by wrath, strategy, and the need to never be powerless again. By 1221, Genghis Khan stood atop the world. He had destroyed empires, unified tribes, and commanded loyalty across half of Eurasia. His armies had rewritten the borders of civilization. The Silk Road flowed with wealth, and yet, even he knew, conquest was only half the task. To preserve what he had built, he would have to invent something the steppe had never seen, an empire that could last beyond the man who made it. After crushing the Khwarezmian Empire, Genghis returned to Mongolia. His homeland remained the spiritual heart of his vision, where every decision, every law, and every successor would be tested. The Mongol world was changing. No longer were they raiders and scavengers. They were governors, generals, administrators. It was no longer enough to destroy. Now he would have to rule. To maintain control, Genghis reorganized his administration. He divided the empire among his sons, granting each authority over different regions, while ensuring all owed loyalty to the center. He created postal relay systems, YAM for fast communication. He standardized taxation, law, and punishment across tribal lines. He recruited scholars, engineers, and scribes from China, Persia, and the Islamic world. He decreed religious tolerance across his empire, believing loyalty mattered more than belief. What he ruled was not merely a kingdom, but a machine of war and trade, bound together by discipline, terror, and absolute loyalty. Genghis codified his rules into a system known as the Yasa, an oral law code memorized and enforced by his generals. These laws were brutal but effective. Theft and betrayal were punishable by death. Soldiers could not loot without permission. All children, regardless of origin, must be fed and clothed. Spies and deserters were to be executed without trial. But there were also laws of meritocracy and justice. Genghis promoted based on ability, not birth. He allowed the poor to rise. He bound the tribes together under one law, one banner, and one fearsome reputation. The chaos of the steppe had become a system. The wild tribes had become a nation of warriors, and now, governors. Even as he aged, Genghis continued to expand Mongol control, launching campaigns into the Caucasus, raiding Eastern Europe, and extending his influence into Tibet. But his thoughts turned toward the question no conqueror can ignore: who will take the crown when I fall? He had many sons: Jochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, Tolui, each a fierce warrior, each ambitious. But only one could succeed him. Tensions rose. Jochi, the eldest, was resented by some due to questions of his paternity. Chagatai was brave, but hot-headed. Tolui, the youngest, was loyal and strong, but untested. Genghis feared civil war. He made his choice. Ogedei, the moderate, the diplomat, would be the next great Khan, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the most balanced, the most likely to hold the empire together. It was a decision made not from sentiment, but from survival. In 1226, the Western Shia, once subdued, now defiant, rebelled. They refused to send troops when Genghis demanded support against Khwarezm. They believed he was aging, weakening, finished. They were wrong. Genghis Khan rode west again, despite illness and fatigue. His fury was cold and deliberate. Cities were wiped from the map. The Shia capital was besieged and obliterated. When the emperor finally surrendered, Genghis ordered him executed, along with his entire royal line. In 1227, during the final stages of the Shia campaign, Genghis Khan died. The exact cause remains a mystery. Some say he fell from his horse. Others whisper he was wounded in battle. A few legends say he was assassinated. His body was returned to Mongolia in secret. His burial site remains unknown to this day. A mystery lost to time, guarded by legends that his funeral escort slaughtered every witness to preserve the secret. The storm had passed, but the thunder still echoed. When Genghis died, he left behind the largest contiguous land empire in world history. It stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. It contained more cultures, languages, and religions than any empire before it, and it was far from finished. His descendants would carry the flame. Ogedei would become Great Khan, expanding into Russia and Europe. Kublai Khan, his grandson, would later rule all of China and found the Yuan dynasty. Hulagu Khan would burn Baghdad and crush the Islamic Golden Age. But even as the empire expanded, cracks would emerge. The unity forged by Genghis would eventually fragment into rival khanates. His sons and grandsons would rule by his name, but not always by his wisdom. Genghis Khan did not die as a king in a palace. He died as he lived, a rider beneath the eternal blue sky. And what he left behind was not just territory. It was a legacy of power, terror, and transformation that would ripple for centuries. They called him the Scourge of God, the Devil of the East. But behind every ruin he left in flames stood something else, something even more terrifying. Order, a legacy of paradox. Destroyer and builder Genghis Khan razed cities, but opened trade routes. He slaughtered entire populations, yet enforced religious tolerance. He left behind more corpses than most plagues, yet his empire became the safest, most interconnected expanse the world had ever known. He built no temples, raised no great statues, but his fingerprints remain on the spine of the modern world. He connected East and West, revitalizing the Silk Road, allowing the spread of paper, gunpowder, printing, and ideas between distant cultures. He reshaped warfare with speed, coordination, psychological terror, and meritocratic command structures. He pioneered global diplomacy, sending envoys to Europe, Persia, and China, demanding alliances or obedience. His empire was violent, but it was also innovative. He left the world more connected and more vulnerable. Today, Genghis Khan has over 16 million living male descendants, a legacy imprinted into human DNA. He is literally in the blood of history. The Mongol Empire didn't just influence Eurasia, it redrew it. Russia's rise was shaped by its resistance to Mongol rule. China's imperial structure was molded by Kublai Khan, his grandson. Even the Ottoman Empire emerged in the wake of Mongol chaos. The collapse of Baghdad in 1258, the end of the Islamic Golden Age. Echoes of his legacy. The plague spread into Europe, enabled by Mongol trade routes. He was one man, and yet he tilted the entire axis of civilization. But Genghis Khan's legacy is not just empire and empire builders. It is a warning, a mirror. He rose because the world ignored the outcast, because greed, arrogance, and complacency allowed the barbarian to learn their systems and burn them from within. He is proof that history does not belong to kings, or cities, or wealth. It belongs to the hungry, to those who refuse to stay broken, to those who crawl through exile, betrayal, and pain, and come back wielding fire. The modern world owes Genghis Khan more than most realize. The concept of unified law across cultures, the belief that merit outranks blood, the understanding that mobility is strength, that speed is dominance, and that empires are built not in palaces, but on trust, fear, and vision. And above all, he left behind the enduring truth that power never starts with privilege. It starts with the one who refuses to die. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me. Genghis Khan. He was born a hunted child. He died an emperor feared from ocean to ocean, and in between, he rewrote what one life could do.
The echoes you heard today came from a time that was never truly silent. And if you listened closely, you felt it. The breath of kings, the grief of queens, the weight of truth buried beneath stone. So don't walk away just yet. Subscribe to Echoes of the Middle Ages and let the past keep speaking. Because what was left behind was never meant to be forgotten. History never dies. It just becomes an echo,